I mean, you only have to really go through that list of signings that they made this season. Pedro, Gittins, Garnacho, Esteval, Jarel Hato, Delap, and then you can kind of go down to the lower guys like Sarr, Kenji Paez, etc., like that. Silvio from Sporting. Um, as you correctly point out, that's a lot of kind of young signings who, as you said, would use Chelsea as a kind of stepping stone, perhaps, or maybe not stepping stone, but step up to what they're playing at. But and perhaps maybe aside from perhaps João Pedro, it's not a lot of senior players on that team. It's not a lot of kind of leaders, not a lot of kind of experienced players. And curiously enough, it's not really been these so-called kind of young prospects who, if you maybe want to take a more kind of, I don't want to say pessimistic, but maybe a more kind of cold, calculated look at Chelsea's transfer policy and say, okay, they're trying to emulate maybe what Manchester City have done, where they scout young players and then sell the ones that they don't really need. Instead of having guys like, Garnacho perhaps, or Hato, or maybe not Hato because he was probably signed for to be a senior player, but rather than seeing a lot of these young players blossom at Chelsea and then potentially with the prospect of maybe selling them for a tidy profit this summer to finance the sign of the big players, we're instead seeing the senior players be the ones who've been linked with moves away, haven't we? I mean, Cucurella was flirting with potential move to Barcelona during the international break. Cole Palmer has been continuously linked with a move away from the club. Just speculation, of course, at this point. And then very recently, Enzo Fernandez was suspended for his comments about leaving Chelsea. So do you think, no, I'm not going to say do you think these players are desperate to leave because we just don't know those things, but do you think the fact that these senior players are making these comments or being linked with departures from the club is because there's a frustration maybe at Chelsea that there's too many of the, I don't want to come across as saying you can't win things with kids, but there's maybe too many prospects and, works in progress and not enough kind of signings that are ready made to help Chelsea get back into that top four?
I definitely think that's part of it. I think that at the end of the day, if Chelsea were top of the league, these players wouldn't be wanting to leave in such a hurry, I think. And we don't know for sure they do want to leave. It could be a ploy to get more money or bigger contracts or, trying to influence some change at Chelsea, like we've already discussed. I think with regards to Enzo Fernandez, he's been at the club for over 3 years now. So if there was a time for him to sort of ditch the Chelsea project, it probably would be now. He's getting to, I think, 25 years old. His stock is quite high this season. I think he's had a good season. So it's natural for clubs like Real Madrid and PSG to be interested and also for him to have that reciprocal interest. Uh, and you look at Cucurella, for example, he's in the prime of his career. Again, had another good season last year. You can't blame him for flirting with the idea of going back to his boyhood club, Barcelona. Uh, I think the one that baffles me a little bit is the noise around Palmer because he's not been playing well. Um, and going to Manchester United, okay, they've had a better season this year, but it's not exactly like they're completely a stable environment. They're going to be challenging for honours. They're still in a rebuild of their own, maybe heading in the right direction. Um, so I think in terms of ambitions for Chelsea, I could certainly see Fernandez being sold after this whole, the banning saga, because it was just completely unnecessary for it to become that. It's been blown out of proportion. With Cucurella, I think people have said his comments were actually worse. And I would actually agree with that. I didn't know why Cucurella didn't get punished. But I think the problem is with what both of the players said was those home truths struck the nerve of the owners. Somewhere deep down, they understand that what they were saying is correct. And they didn't like it, of course. They don't like that criticism coming from within. Um, Now, will they actually leave? I personally could only see Fernandez leaving if it's a British transfer record kind of fee coming in because, with his market value as it is, that's exceedingly high, but Chelsea will want a fee that matches what they paid for him or in excess of that. I think, yeah, with Chelsea, with those three players, if they were to lose them this summer, it would be absolutely devastating because there's no confidence from the fans, at least, that these sporting directors and the owners would target the players required to replace what they give to the team. It could
Yeah.
be another 60 million signing, 21 years old, 8 goals in 31 games. That's not what Chelsea need. Chelsea need top quality players to replace Palmer, Fernandez, and Cucurella. And I think if the players of that standard leave Chelsea, they could be in really big trouble.
Well, I guess I have to put you on the line here and say, what do you think will happen? Do you think we'll see another summer of young players being signed, an influx of, players that have been scouted, or maybe players that are up for sale, or even players coming from the other blue coal members of that kind of that kind of multi-club ownership? Or do you think we'll see the young players in that squad be sold off, maybe sign more experienced players, maybe bolster the ranks with more Fernandezes and Cucurellas and Palmers, etc.? Or do you think they'll maybe just batten down the hatches and say, we're not buying and selling anyone, we're going to try and fix this squad with the squad we have here? Because, as we touched on earlier, this is still the most valuable squad in the Premier League. And that's not because they're the most valuable players in the league, it's because there's so many players in that squad. So if any club could probably go the entire summer without buying anyone and just maybe working on what they already have, it would be Chelsea, wouldn't it?
That would be the logical point of view to approach it from, Stefan. But I don't think Chelsea think that way. It's all a case of it's like a fluid kind of ingoings and outgoings at the club. Um, and I think there'll be this summer will be no different. There'll be, we've got Quenda coming in from Sporting Lisbon already. So there's a new arrival. I'm excited about what he can do because he's looked really good. And in terms of the fee, it wasn't extortionate. I would say they need more experience in the squad. And one player that has been linked, for example, is Marcos Senesi from Bournemouth. I think that's the kind of ideal sign you need for the squad. He's 28. He's got that Argentina connection with Fernandez and Garnacho, so you can sort of help them a bit. Free transfer, so it's a completely, risk-free kind of deal. I guess obviously you might have to give him a big contract, but I think he's actually earned it from his performances this season. It's just like adding a few players of that age, 26, 27, 28, would make a whole big difference for Chelsea this season. I do think they need another goalkeeper, an experienced goalkeeper, someone between 29 and 31 years old, Champions League experience. Doesn't have to be Premier League experience, but I think the current offering of goalkeepers is not for a club that's in the Champions League. You look at Man City got Donnarumma, Arsenal have got Raya. You know, Sanchez or Jorgensen, they're not at that level, and they had the opportunity to go for Mike Maignan, and apparently were put off by £20 million. I mean, you've gone and spent £50 million on Jamie Gittins, so it's very hard to guess what kind of direction the transfers are going to go. I think a lot will depend on whether Rossini is still in charge, and I think at the moment that is likely, even though there's a lot of opposition from the fans saying he's out of his depth. I think he deserves a bit more time, to be honest with you, but you have to get results on the pitch. And yeah, I do have an idea of who I'd want to take over if it's not Rossini. Um, should I go ahead and say that?
Well, yeah, you've kind of bled into my last question, actually, to an extent,
Yeah,
in the sense that I was going to ask about Rossini and where you think he's done a good enough job. Do you think?
yeah.
Well, I
Okay,
guess there's two things here. There's how do you think he's done, and how do you think Chelsea deem him to have been done? And do you think if he doesn't finish in that fifth spot and get Champions League, they will move on in the summer? And then after you've kind of chewed through all that, maybe you can let me know who you think would be the perfect appointment.
okay. Yeah, so obviously, I think when it was announced that Rossini was coming in, I thought he wasn't ready for the job. In terms of he's had experience of Hull and obviously done quite well with Strasbourg with the young players. So I think from the board's point of view, he was exactly the kind of figure they wanted in terms of he wasn't going to cause a problem with over transfers like perhaps Maresca did, or um, and he would play the players given to him and try and improve them. Um, and I think he had a good start. I think he had a decent start in the Premier League, also in the cup competitions. Maybe you could say he's had an easier start than most would have had. And now that the more challenging fixtures have come, very fast at him, PSG, Man City, they are exposing his lack of experience at the top in terms of, just trying to grind out results necessarily in difficult moments. There was that last 15 minutes against PSG where they conceded 3 goals. There was the Man City game where you conceded 3 goals in quick succession. It's quite surprising for me that Rossini, as a former defensive player, is perceptively weak in that department. There doesn't seem to be any kind of organization. But then you could also argue, well, does he have the personnel to carry out those instructions? And especially with like players like Shalaba out injured, he's one of the senior players in the squad, and he's like 25, 26. So that kind of sums it up. I think the problem for me with Rossini is it's a lot of words. There's a lot of interviews and there's a lot of focus on the mental side of it, but I think tactically, especially in the last month or so, Chelsea have really been lacking that, expertise to take hold of games, and that's where it's gone wrong very quickly. My other point is that I think he might be trying to change too much too quickly, and there was one other manager who did that, Andre Villas-Boas, and he benched Lampard, Drogba, and it quickly went south for him. I think with Rossini, he's tried to mark his stamp, like a bit similar to how Arteta did when he first got to Arsenal. Trying to ensure that he's got the players' respect and they're all following the same kind of party line. And obviously, where Fernandez and Cucurella have stepped out of line, that's kind of given him a bit of a conundrum. Do I come down heavy on them and then obviously get accused of, going over the top, or do you have this other point where you're like too soft, you're too nice, and the players can run roughshod over you? So it's a difficult situation for him to be in, especially how old he is, and at this stage in his career. I I think if he doesn't get Champions League qualification, there's going to be people calling for his head. Or, Chelsea are in the semi-finals of the FA Cup, so if they were to win that, that would give the fans a reminder that this is still a team that can win things. Maybe not the Premier League or Champions League, but still win trophies and give those moments to remember.
Mm-hmm.
But going on to that point about an alternative manager, the one I would go for right now is Cesc Fabregas. I think he'd be a popular appointment considering his Chelsea links. He's got that kind of winning mentality within that we saw with like Antonio Conte, Jose Mourinho, and his incredible work for Como with young players as well. It's a huge selling point for him. The only question is, would he actually want to come to Chelsea right now? Because, Como are in the Champions League places, and he seems to be very happy doing what he's doing there. So the only question left is, well, are they going to keep Rossini? And if so, would they go for someone like Fabregas, or would it be another English manager? I think that kind of lack of certainty about what direction Chelsea are going in is half the problem at the moment. I don't think the manager is the main problem. It's the people above him making decisions that people are left baffled by. That really is causing a lot of unrest at Chelsea.
Yeah, that's an interesting call, and we did have Marius on the show a few weeks ago to talk about Como and how well they're doing. So I think Cesc Fabregas would be a great shout, but I do also agree with you, and I think this is what Marius' point he made is that they're obviously in the ascendancy and doing very well right now. So he might be quite hard to pull to one side. Although I must say I was at the Arsenal Leverkusen game recently, and Cesc Fabregas was in attendance because I literally bumped into him, not on purpose. So he does frequent London plenty of times, but yeah, that's we'll need to see maybe what happens.